My phone buzzed on the polished oak desk, the vibration echoing softly against the walls of my corner office. I glanced at the screen, and my heart caught in an odd mix of anticipation and dread. "Happy birthday, Emma," the message read. From Mom. Simple, almost casual. Last year, there had been nothing. The year before that, just a faint acknowledgement buried in a group text. And every year before that, my birthday had been a ghost, ignored while my brother's celebrations were plastered all over social media, glittering and loud, as if the world revolved around him. I adjusted the sleeve of my silk blouse, smooth and crisp, feeling the cool fabric against my skin. Outside, the city hummed below, a tide of life moving without me, or so it felt during those years when my existence had been an afterthought. I sipped my coffee, its warmth grounding me, and stared out the window. I had built this life carefully, quietly, away from their expectations, their favoritism. Yet the message stirred something deeper, an old ache I thought I had tamed. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, poised to reply, and I felt the irony prick at me. Successful, independent, unshakable on the surface, yet still haunted by the memory of candles I had never blown, wishes I had whispered alone. And then I saw it, a tagged photo of my brother's latest birthday party. The laughter, the cake, the sparkling decorations. I exhaled slowly, tasting both bitterness and resolve. This year would be different. I can still remember the sting of that day, as if it were yesterday. I was 16, standing in the living room, my hands trembling around the edges of a carefully wrapped gift. My parents were bustling around, stringing balloons and arranging flowers for Michael, my younger brother, whose birthday had somehow become a neighborhood spectacle. I had baked a small cake, handwritten a card with every ounce of love I had, yet it was as though I didn't exist. "Emma, just leave it," Mom had said dismissively, not even looking at me. "He doesn't want a fuss from you." The words cut deeper than any slap could. My throat tightened, my fingers curled around the card until the paper creased. I felt invisible, like a shadow in my own home, while the world celebrated someone else. Even Michael barely glanced at me. His smile was reserved for the guests, not for the sister who had spent hours thinking about him. I sank into the armchair, my grandmother's old brooch in my hand, the one she had given me last summer. "Never let someone else decide your worth, Emma," she had whispered, pressing it into my palm. "Your light is yours to shine. Don't dim it for anyone." I clutched it then, letting the cold metal ground me, a small talisman against the tide of neglect. I remember the lump in my throat, the way tears blurred the streamers and candles, how my small voice caught when I finally muttered, "Fine, I'll just leave." And I did. Not angrily, not in rebellion. I just left their world behind, stepping into the unknown with nothing but that brooch, a heart full of quiet fury, and a stubborn belief that one day I would matter, not just in the shadows, not just as someone's afterthought. That night, I promised myself I would carve my own path, one where recognition would be earned, not handed out selectively. That evening, I walked out of the house, past the laughter and the confetti, into the cold night air, inhaling freedom and fear in equal measure. I had no idea what lay ahead, but I knew I would never again allow someone else to define my worth. The first morning on my own, I woke up in a tiny apartment with sunlight leaking through the blinds, painting stripes across the threadbare carpet. No family to check in, no parties, no whispers of dismissal, just me, the smell of cheap coffee, and the hum of possibility. I had nothing but a part-time job at a small boutique, my grandmother's brooch pinned to my blouse for courage, and a stubborn determination that no one could ever take away again. It wasn't easy. Nights stretched long, the city lights mocking me while I pored over books, learning business basics, reading about marketing, finance, anything that could give me a foothold. I worked 3 jobs at a time, hands raw from the hours, eyes stinging from exhaustion. Doubt crept in like fog. Was I capable? Was I good enough? But each morning, I fastened that brooch to my chest and whispered, "Your light is yours, Emma. Shine anyway." Then I met Claire, a seasoned art gallery owner who spotted me selling handmade jewelry at a local craft fair. "You have an eye," she said, tilting her head as she examined my work. "Don't hide it. If you keep doubting yourself, someone else will take your place." Claire became my mentor, guiding me through contracts, exhibitions, and negotiations, teaching me to speak with authority, to value my work, to refuse compromise when my instincts told me it was worth more. The wins came slowly. My first client paid double what I expected. The first gallery commissioned a small collection. My first paycheck alone made me feel the sharp, intoxicating taste of independence. I celebrated quietly. No social media posts, no gloating, just the soft satisfaction of knowing I had built this life from scratch. And still, the shadow of the past lingered. I avoided calls home, limited my posts to generic updates, and kept the real details of my success private. I didn't want their approval. I wanted their absence to become irrelevant. I remember the night I first realized I had crossed the invisible line into real accomplishment. I was in my studio, surrounded by pieces I had created with my own hands, framed and hanging elegantly on the walls. The city skyline glittered beyond the window, and I held a glass of wine in one hand, the brooch gleaming on my chest. I allowed myself a small smile. I made this. I did this. Alone. Every late night, every moment of doubt, every sacrifice had led me here. I had transformed my anger and loneliness into determination, and it had paid off, not just financially, but by the quiet, unshakable knowledge that I was enough. I didn't need validation from birthdays forgotten or parties ignored. I had built my own celebration of self-worth, and it was brilliant. The knock at my office door startled me. I had been reviewing contracts, fingers grazing the smooth surface of my desk, the city skyline twinkling behind me like a promise. I hadn't expected anyone from home, certainly not my parents or Michael. Yet there they were, standing awkwardly in the doorway, hesitant and unsure, the same entitled expressions I had carried in my memory for years. "Emma, we thought we'd stop by," Mom said, her voice a mixture of caution and curiosity, like she was approaching an animal she hadn't seen in a decade. Michael's eyes flickered around the office, taking in the space I had crafted over years of dedication. The walls were lined with framed awards, photographs from gallery exhibitions, and abstract art I had commissioned from emerging local artists. My desk gleamed with polished mahogany, a sleek laptop open amidst leather-bound notebooks and carefully arranged personal mementos. Even the air smelled of a subtle, refined vanilla and cedar, a reflection of control, taste, and hard-earned success. I stood from my chair, smoothing the silk of my blouse, and gave them a calm, steady smile. "I'm glad you stopped by," I said, my voice soft but edged with authority. "I assume you were expecting something else?" Mom's mouth opened, then closed, as if words had abandoned her. Michael shifted his weight, his bravado faltering under the weight of the office's silent testimony. I let the moment stretch, letting my accomplishments speak for themselves. The awards, the framed newspaper articles, the photographs of my jewelry featured in galleries across the country, all of it evidence that the girl they had ignored was now a woman they couldn't dismiss. Finally, I spoke. For years, I watched birthdays pass, celebrations that didn't include me, parties thrown for others while my own milestones were invisible. I never asked for recognition. I never demanded attention. But I did demand one thing, that my life would have meaning on my own terms. And it does. I walked them through my journey, careful not to gloat, but precise in the truth. I explained my business, the exhibitions, the partnerships, the net worth I had quietly amassed. I told them about the mentors, the late nights, the small victories that had piled into a life of independence. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's eyes glistened, guilt and awe mingling, while Michael looked as if he had been slapped by reality. I didn't realize, he muttered, voice breaking under unfamiliar humility. I held up the brooch my grandmother had given me, the one that had guided me through years of neglect and doubt. This, I said, letting it catch the light, reminded me that my worth isn't defined by others' attention. It's defined by the courage to create my own life. And in that moment, I realized something profound. The power had shifted. For the first time in my life, they were silent witnesses to my triumph, unable to rewrite the story they had once tried to control. I wasn't just Emma, the forgotten daughter. They were staring at Emma, the unstoppable woman who had refused to be invisible. The room vibrated with unspoken acknowledgement. They had come expecting weakness, and instead, they found strength. And it was perfect. I could feel the weight of the room shift, like gravity itself had acknowledged my authority. For so many years, I had been the one bending, the one shrinking, the one waiting for crumbs of attention. But now, the tables had turned. And I knew exactly what that meant. I wasn't here to punish them, but I wasn't here to repeat the mistakes of the past, either. I'm willing to help, I began, letting my voice carry calm authority. But it won't be on the same terms as before. This isn't about fixing you overnight. It's about change. Real change. Mom swallowed, eyes wide. Change how? First, I said, holding her gaze. You need to acknowledge that your favoritism shaped the way I viewed myself. That kind of neglect leaves scars. Apologies are not enough. You have to actively listen and you have to try to understand, not just react. I turned to Michael, who had shifted uncomfortably, guilt etched across his face. You, I continued, need to take responsibility for your entitlement. You can no longer assume the world revolves around you, and you need to start building your own achievements instead of relying on others' attention. Respect, empathy, and effort. These are non-negotiable. Mom exhaled, her shoulders sagging. I see that now. Second, I said, my tone firm but gentle. You must let me live my life fully. That means boundaries. I am happy to include you in my world, but I will not compromise my peace or my progress to accommodate old patterns. I paused, letting each word settle. The brooch, resting against my chest, gleamed faintly, a reminder of the woman I had become. And finally, I said, we all need to grow individually. Toxic habits, resentment, comparisons, dismissals, they end here. You pursue your passions, your dreams, and your growth. I will guide, support, and advise, but I will not live in the shadows of your expectations anymore. I watched their faces transform slowly, a mixture of awe, shame, and tentative hope. They were processing, and I let them. I didn't need immediate compliance. This was about lasting change, about rewriting the narrative that had trapped us for decades. For the first time, I realized that power wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity, about creating the conditions for everyone to rise, or at least try. Compassion didn't mean weakness, and firmness didn't mean cruelty. I had learned that the hard way, piece by piece, late night after late night, struggle after struggle. As I looked at them, I felt a quiet pride. The girl who had once been invisible, whose birthdays were forgotten, who had watched from the sidelines, was now the architect of her own life. And she was shaping not just her destiny, but the potential for theirs to change as well. The shift was complete. I had the upper hand, not to crush, but to guide, with conditions, boundaries, and unwavering self-respect. The rules were clear: grow, respect, create, and above all, acknowledge the power of your own choices. Weeks passed, and I watched the changes unfold slowly, quietly, like the first shoots of spring after a long winter. Mom began calling, not just with obligatory messages, but to share her efforts at self-reflection. She enrolled in a course on emotional intelligence and started volunteering, finding small ways to repair the habits that had once hurt me so deeply. Michael took his first real steps toward independence, starting his own business, showing genuine accountability, and learning the value of effort over entitlement. I allowed myself to feel pride, not just in myself, but in the possibility that they could grow, too. It wasn't perfect. There were setbacks, awkward conversations, and moments when old patterns resurfaced. But the difference now was that I held the boundaries, and they were willing to respect them. Late at night, in my studio, I often held the brooch my grandmother had given me, turning it gently in my fingers. It had survived my journey from invisibility to influence, from doubt to triumph. I remembered her words. Your light is yours to shine. Don't dim it for anyone. And I understood fully that this was never about their recognition. It had always been about me choosing to honor my own light, no matter what. I looked around at the life I had built, the awards on the walls, the thriving business, the spaces that reflected not just success, but authenticity. I had learned that power wasn't about controlling others. It was about controlling yourself, your choices, and your destiny. Sometimes, I still felt a flicker of the old hurt when birthdays passed quietly or when old family patterns crept into conversation. But I no longer feared them. I had transformed the pain into strength, the neglect into purpose, the loneliness into independence. And in that transformation, I found freedom. I smiled, letting the city lights outside blend with the soft glow of my office. The journey had been long, painful, and beautiful in its own way. I had discovered the woman I was always meant to be, resilient, accomplished, and uncompromisingly myself. And finally, I whispered into the quiet, a voiceover for the story of my life. I am enough. I always was. And now, I shine on my own terms.